Hello there, greetings and good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you here to the Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this channel. So we're here with this series that we've been running now. I guess this will be number 6, so it's been for 6 weeks. This is Monsters of the 70s, in which this series I've chosen 10 different bands and do a little bit of a deep dive into that I think are pretty influential and what they're influential in. All that kind of good stuff. So the band we're going to be talking about today is none other than my favorite band, Rush. So this band here, Rush, I do kind of like this album quite a bit as far as the artwork goes anyways. So Rush's history. So Rush's history starts back in 1968 when Alex Lifeson and several other musicians got together. And Alex Lifeson was kind of the leader of the band then, but they didn't really go too far at that point in time. They were still pretty young at that point, what probably would have been in their early teens or mid-teens. And then they decided to go, he was more serious than the others, so they added Geddy Lee fairly quickly after that. Eventually adding John Rutsey, who then became the main band who produced the very first album by them, simply entitled Rush. But Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson wanted a different sound and wanted to move in a different direction than Rutsey did. So Rutsey left the band and was replaced by Neil Peart on this particular album, becoming the drummer de facto lyricist for the band as well. Rush has produced 19 studio albums, a host of live and compilations, as well as some reissued box sets as well. So their biggest selling album is this one, Rush Moving Pictures, which came out in 1981. This album has, since its inception, produced more than closer to 6 million units purchased. So 6 million albums, roughly close to 6 million albums. And it did 1 million of that in the first 2 months of its existence. So easily the biggest selling album for them. My personal favorite, we've already seen, is this one from 1975. This has only been my personal favorite for maybe about a year now. It's always been a top 5 album for me. It's been as high as number 2 for a long period of time. But recently, I decided that it has more upside for me than the album, which was Permanent Ways, which was my favorite. So this one has moved into my favorite spot, and at the current time, still maintains that spot. And it was released in 1975, their first album with Neil Peart, as I've already said. So Rush's has some notable things. They were nominated into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame back in 2013. The traditional classic members of the band, which feature Neil Peart, Alex Lifeson, and Geddy Lee on vocals and bass. So, yeah, that's kind of their honorary thing. Now, they were, I believe, inducted with the whatever the equivalent is of Order of Canada, I guess is what it would be called. They did get that as well. They've had a few other awards. They've a number of Juno Awards, if these kind of things mean anything to you, which they don't really mean much to me. It's why I don't know a lot about them. However, they've produced a large number of albums and are one of the biggest producing bands in their history in the United States. They've produced over 25 million of those albums. Anyways, my personal history with the band includes I started watching them. The first time I seen them was in 1977, and I believe it might have been one of the old rock shows. I don't think it was Midnight Special. It was probably damn, I can't remember the name of the show, but I remember seeing them. They performed 2 tracks on that show, Xanadu and Closer to the Heart, I believe, are the 2 that they performed. And so that was my first encounter with them. I was probably 13 at the time. I wasn't solely impressed by what I saw. I wasn't even sure that the vocalist singing was even a guy, was even a girl at the time. I thought he was a girl at the time, but clearly he wasn't. Anyways, it wasn't until a few years later when, well, not even quite a few years later, maybe a year later, when we were living out in the East End, I rented an album from the library, this one, and this was the first time I'd listened to an entire album by them. Now, I actually was looking for the 2 that I had seen on TV on the Farewell to Kings, but they did not have that album for rental. This was the one that I took because I liked the big owl on the cover. I'm a fan of owls. So that became my first kind of full-on listen to. But at the time, I was still a huge Kiss fan, so wasn't really motivated to do much other than just listen to the album because it was a free listen. So after a few years, we're now approaching the end of the 1970s. I started listening to some bands more consistently than I was starting to drift away from Kiss, and those bands included Queen, Styx, Black Sabbath, and Rush. Of those 4 bands, Rush was the big one for me. When they released Permanent Waves in 1980, they became my favorite band. It was almost overnight because Kiss was waning by this time quite a bit and needed to be replaced in my mind, and Rush was the band that took the mantle and became my favorite band. This lasted for a couple of years, probably right through Signal, so probably into the early 80s. Maybe as long as all of 1982. So for about three full years, they were my favorite band. And then they were replaced by Yes, because Rush changed overnight and went into Grace Under Pressure. I was not impressed with this at all. And so I bailed on them like every good, what do they call it? Guy who jumps off the cart. I was good at that. I jumped off the cart and took on Yes. Yes became my favorite band, and for the next probably 18 years or so, maybe 19 years, Yes was the number 1 band. But Yes went through their own fall as well. And even though a lot of my bands had jumped off at this point in time, so Yes kind of held the mantle based on the fact that they didn't jump as far as the other ones. So they remained my favorite band for about 19 years. And then when my daughter was born, I was listening to a lot of music, and I came back to Rush again. Plus a guy I had known had told me they changed their music away from that electronic sound, came back to a more Rush-like heavy sound. So I started listening to them again. At first, just their old albums, playing them a lot. Within a year of my daughter's birth, they had replaced Yes as my favorite band and have been my favorite band ever since. That's been about 24 years now that they've been back at number 1. And a few years after they replaced them, they came out with Snakes and Arrows, which absolutely I loved. This album really launched me to collect most of their stuff again, and including a lot of their newer albums, Vapor Trails, Clockwork Angels. When it came out, I bought it on the same day. Coincidentally, that album took a long time for me to really absorb. Probably took about 6 years before I really absorbed that album. I don't know what it was about it. Maybe it was the change in Geddy's voice probably was the biggest reason. But I went back and started collecting all their stuff, and ever since then, they've been the champs. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. So anyways, that's my history with Rush. That's Rush in general, to my way of thinking, and the things that we wanted to talk about in this episode. Very influential. A lot of the more progressive metal bands cite this band as being one of their favorites. In fact, Rush has influenced a lot of bands. I see every once in a while I'll see one of these bands, metal bands and progressive bands and other bands playing Rush music at their concerts. So, anyways, that's my take for today. Rush is the band that we're doing today for Monsters of the 1970s. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please hit the like and subscribe. If you want to make any comments about Rush or this series, you can do that in the comment section below. And we will see you all next week with another episode. We are going to be doing the Eagles next on the list, so hopefully that will appeal to some people as well. So take care, have yourself a good evening and a good afternoon, and goodbye here from the Prog Monster.